The first siren cut through the night just as William Hale tied his boots. It wasn't loud at first, more like a distant cry, but it rose quickly, swelling until it filled the narrow space of his bedroom. William paused, one knee on the floor, fingers frozen around the lace. The siren's echo bounced between brick buildings, stretched thin by the cold air of early fall. He waited for it to fade, for the sound to drift somewhere else. It didn't. Blue and red lights slid across his wall in slow, nervous pulses. The shadows of his posters, football legends he'd grown up idolizing, shifted and bent like they were trying to look away. William stood up slowly. His heart was already racing, though he couldn't say why. He hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't even been outside since practice ended. Still, a familiar tension crept into his chest, the kind he'd learned not to question growing up in Southside Columbus. Sirens didn't have to be meant for you to feel like they were. He pushed the blinds aside just enough to look. The patrol car rolled to a stop directly in front of his building. "No," William whispered. No. Just 2 hours earlier, he'd been sitting on this same bed, laughing into his phone as messages poured in. Teammates, old coaches, friends he hadn't talked to in years. Everyone seemed to know before he'd even processed it himself. A 2-year contract. Not a trial. Not a maybe. A real contract with the community team, modest pay sure, but stability. A chance. The kind of chance kids like William were told to work for quietly and be grateful for if it ever came. He'd folded the printed offer letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket before leaving practice, like it might disappear if he looked at it too long. William hadn't told his mom yet. She was working the night shift at the hospital, and he wanted to see her face when he said the words out loud. "I made it." He imagined her sitting at the kitchen table in the morning, coffee growing cold as she shook her head in disbelief and smiled that tired, proud smile. A knock thundered against his door. "Police. Open up." The sound snapped him back into the moment, sharp and unforgiving. William's mouth went dry. His brain raced through possibilities: noise complaint, wrong apartment, maybe they were looking for someone else entirely. He opened the door anyway. Slowly. Carefully. The hallway flooded with uniforms. There were 3 officers, hands resting near their belts, eyes already scanning him. One of them glanced down at a phone, then back up at William's face, his gaze lingering just a second too long. "That's him," the officer said. "William Hale." The words landed heavy. Before William could respond, hands guided him forward, firm but not rough. Cold metal clicked around his wrists. "Wait, what?" William stammered. "What's going on?" "You're being detained," another officer said, voice rehearsed, distant. "You have the right to remain silent." "But I didn't do anything," William said. His voice shook despite his effort to keep it steady. "You have the wrong guy." The officers didn't answer. They led him down the hallway, past doors he'd walked by 100 times, past the chipped paint and buzzing lights that had always felt familiar. Tonight, everything looked different, smaller, sharper. Outside the air was crisp. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Someone across the street raised a phone. A camera flash went off. William felt his stomach drop. This is how it starts, he thought. Not with facts. With images. At the station, time blurred. His phone was taken. His jacket was hung on a hook, the folded contract still inside. He wanted to tell them, "I just signed, I have a future, you can't do this," but the words stuck in his throat. They sat him in a holding room with pale walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, relentless. His wrists were uncuffed, but the ghost of the metal remained, like an imprint he couldn't shake. Minutes stretched into hours. William tried to breathe slowly like he did before penalty kicks. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. He replayed practice in his head, the way the ball had felt glued to his foot, the coach's whistle, the laughter in the locker room. He clung to those memories like proof that his life was real, that this room was temporary. A detective finally entered, older than the officers, with tired eyes and a creased jacket. He didn't sit at first. He studied William the way a scout studies a player, measuring, comparing. "Where were you tonight between 9 and 10? The detective asked. "At practice," William replied immediately. "Community field on Jefferson. Coach Ramirez. The whole team was there." The detective nodded slowly and placed a photo on the table. The man in the picture could have been William's shadow. Same height. Same athletic build. Same skin tone. But the more William looked, the clearer the differences became. The man's eyes were colder. A jagged scar cut across his eyebrow. "This man robbed a convenience store nearby," the detective said. "Witnesses gave your name." William felt a surge of disbelief. "My name?" The detective shrugged slightly. Could have been overheard. Could have been intentional. We're sorting it out. That's not me, William said. His voice was firmer now. I've never seen that man. We'll verify, the detective replied. Until then you wait. When the door closed again, the silence was crushing. William leaned forward, elbows on the table, and pressed his hands together. For the first time that night, fear turned into something heavier, anger mixed with helplessness. He thought about how easily things were being decided without him. How thin the line was between detained and accused, between mistaken and ruined. He wondered who was speaking for him right now. Across town, Luis Ramirez pushed his dinner plate away untouched. His phone buzzed again, and this time he didn't hesitate to answer. Coach, an assistant said, voice low. I heard William got arrested. Luis stood so fast his chair tipped backward. What? He said. That's impossible. I know. But someone posted a picture. Luis didn't wait for more details. He grabbed his keys and dialed the station number he'd memorized years ago, back when another promising player had disappeared from the roster without explanation. This is Luis Ramirez, he said when someone answered. I manage William Hale. He was at team practice tonight. I have footage, attendance logs, whatever you need. There was a pause on the other end. Hold please. Luis exhaled sharply. He'd seen talent crumble under delays, under assumptions, under the simple fact that truth sometimes arrived too late to matter. He wasn't going to let that happen again. Back in the holding room, William stared at the wall, tracing invisible lines with his eyes. He thought about his mother, about the sacrifices she'd made without ever calling them sacrifices. He imagined her finding out from someone else, from a headline, from a neighbor's whisper. The door opened. The same detective stepped in, but his posture had shifted. He sat this time. We reviewed the store footage, he said. Your manager sent practice videos and timestamps. Facial recognition shows similarities, but the scar placement doesn't match. Also, your alibi checks out. William swallowed. So you're free to go, the detective said. You were mistaken for someone on the run. It happens, the detective added, almost as an afterthought. William stood slowly, legs unsteady. Relief washed over him, followed quickly by exhaustion. As he stepped outside, the night air felt unreal, like he'd crossed into a different version of the same world. Luis was waiting near the entrance. For a second they just looked at each other. Then Luis pulled William into a tight hug. You scared me, Luis said quietly. I thought I lost everything, William replied. You didn't, Luis said. Because you weren't alone. By morning the story tried to form. Blurry photos. Half-truths. But this time the facts moved faster. Statements were made. The image faded. The man with the scar was caught 2 days later. William signed his contract that Friday. At the small press conference, microphones hovered inches from his face. Someone asked how it felt to finally make it. William paused, thinking about sirens and cold metal and how close everything had come to breaking. It feels earned, he said. And fragile. I learned that talent isn't enough. You need people who show up for you. You need the truth to arrive on time. That night stayed with him. Every siren still made his heart jump. But every time he stepped onto the field, he carried the memory with him, not as fear but as resolve. Because he knew now how quickly a life could change. And how powerful it was when someone refused to let a mistake become a tragedy.